The day I returned from the shelter, I believed I was finally going home. The Texas sun was blazing above me as I stood at the iron gate of the house I built with my own hands, scraped palms, sleepless nights, and all. My suitcase was worn to the fabric, one mule missing, my shoes dusted with miles of road and shame. I remember my throat tightening as I saw my brother, Samuel, step out onto the porch. For a second, he looked stunned, then his face hardened like stone. He didn't even let me speak. "We don't take refugees here," he said flatly, his voice slicing through the dry air. "You made your choices. Go find somewhere else to rot." I froze. Refugee. That word hit harder than hunger ever could. I wasn't running from a war, just from a storm that took everything I owned, the business, the truck, the little house near the Colorado River. A storm that forced me into a shelter full of strangers. I thought family would be my shelter next. I thought wrong. My fingers gripped the rusted gate, trembling. I tried to laugh it off, to remind him that I once paid off his mortgage, that I built this very porch with lumber I carried on my back. But he turned his back before I could finish. His wife stood behind the glass door, whispering something that made him laugh. The sound of it felt like gravel in my chest. When the door slammed shut, the echo lingered longer than any thunder I'd ever heard. I stood there for what felt like hours, my shadow stretching across the dry lawn, the wind carrying my brother's words again and again, "We don't take refugees here." I set my suitcase down on the curb. Inside were the last pieces of a life I once called my own, a faded photo of my wife, a pair of work gloves, and a folder of documents too painful to read. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Only a quiet thought did: if this is how they see me now, then they've already forgotten who I am. A truck passed, blowing dust into my face. I wiped it away and forced myself to take a step forward, away from that gate, away from the home that no longer recognized me. My body was weak, but something deep inside began to stir. Anger? Maybe. But beneath that was something colder, stronger: resolve. They called me a refugee. They thought I was finished. But that word would become the beginning of my return. Before I tell you how those same people who called me a refugee later begged me for mercy, please take a moment to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps me keep sharing the kind of stories families try to bury, the ones about betrayal, redemption, and the quiet power of justice. Now, let me take you back to the days before that gate slammed shut, back to when family still meant something, and I still believed home was more than just a roof and four walls. Before everything collapsed, before the storm, before the word refugee became a curse, I lived a life built on calloused hands and quiet pride. I wasn't rich, but I was content. My name is Daniel Reyes, and for more than 40 years, I worked as a construction foreman in Austin, Texas. They say a man's worth is measured by what he leaves standing after he's gone. If that's true, my worth was scattered across the city: foundations I poured, villas I raised, porches I built for families I never knew. Every nail, every beam carried a piece of me. I remember those years vividly. The mornings smelled of sawdust and coffee, the evenings hummed with laughter under the orange glow of the Texas sunset. My wife, Elena, always waited on the porch, a plate of her cornbread warming in her hands. And my younger brother, Samuel, often stopped by uninvited, grinning wide, borrowing my tools and my money with the same shameless ease. He was the talker, I was the builder. He had dreams bigger than his backbone, always chasing shortcuts. Still, I believed in family. I helped him start his own roofing business when he was drowning in debt. I even let him and his wife stay with us for a year when they lost their apartment. Elena used to say, "Danny, you treat your brother better than he deserves." I'd laugh it off. "He's blood," I'd tell her. "Blood doesn't turn its back." If only I'd known how wrong I was. When Elena fell sick, it was Samuel who promised he'd help with her treatment. But when the bills came, he was nowhere to be found. I sold my truck, my tools, anything that wasn't nailed down. She passed in the fall, her last words soft as the wind: "Don't let the world make you bitter, Danny." I buried her beneath the oak tree behind our home, the same tree I'd planted as a sapling the day we moved in. After she was gone, silence became my only companion. Work was the only thing that kept me from crumbling. I threw myself into every project, from downtown condos to the luxury villas out in Travis County. One of those projects was the Austin Ridge Estate, a collection of high-end villas overlooking the lake. The clients were wealthy investors from out of state, the kind who'd never shake a worker's hand but trusted me to make their dreams solid. I never thought much about it then. Just another contract. Just another building. But that estate would one day become the key to everything I'd lose, and later, everything I'd gain. Then came the storm. The one they called Helena. The wind ripped through Austin like it was tearing pages from a book. My old neighborhood near the river was swallowed in water overnight. When I returned after 2 days at the shelter, my home was gone. Elena's tree had fallen, roots exposed like veins in the dirt. The insurance company called it uninsurable damage. The bank called it foreclosure. I called it heartbreak. With nowhere left to go, I reached out to Samuel, the same brother whose business I had once saved, whose roof I'd built with my own 2 hands. He picked up the phone with practiced sympathy, told me I could stay for a while. But when I arrived, suitcase in hand, his wife's eyes told a different story, cold, calculating, annoyed. Still, I believed blood was thicker than pride. I stepped through that gate with hope still flickering inside me. I didn't know that I was walking into the first act of my own humiliation. In those early days, before he turned on me, I would sit on Samuel's porch at night, watching the lights of Austin twinkle in the distance. I thought about starting again, maybe finding small handyman work, maybe renting a room somewhere. But the world doesn't look kindly on a man in his 60s with no truck, no savings, and no one left to speak for him. That's when I began to notice it, the small things. Samuel's wife locking the fridge when she went out. Her whispering whenever I entered a room. The way my brother stopped calling me Danny and started saying man. Hey man, don't touch that. Man, can you clean the garage while you're here? It wasn't long before man turned into burden. But I stayed silent. I told myself it was temporary. That's what old men tell themselves when the world starts to shrink around them. Temporary. What I didn't realize then was that the storm hadn't ended, it had only changed form. It was no longer wind and rain. It was betrayal, greed, and the slow erosion of dignity. That's how my quiet life ended, under the same roof I once helped build, among the same people who would later cast me out like a stray. The day it all shattered wasn't loud. It was quiet, too quiet for what it turned into. I'd been staying in the guest room at Samuel's house for 3 months. The first weeks were tense but tolerable. I cooked, cleaned, and kept to myself. I even fixed their leaky pipes and repainted the porch. I tried to show that I wasn't there to take anything, just to stand on my own feet again. But gratitude fades fast in the hearts of the ungrateful. One morning, I woke early to make breakfast. Old habits, I guess. I was frying eggs when I overheard Samuel and his wife, Clara, in the living room. Their voices were low, but in a house built by my hands, even whispers carry. He's been here long enough, Clara said sharply. People are starting to talk. About what? Samuel muttered. About how we're keeping a refugee in our house. Do you want that reputation? He's your brother, not your charity project. Refugee. That word again. It burned through my chest like acid. Samuel sighed. What do you want me to do? Throw him out? Yes, she snapped. He's not working, not paying bills, just sitting here pretending to be grateful. He's draining us. He needs to go. I turned off the stove slowly, staring at the pan. The eggs were still sizzling, edges curling. The smell of burning oil filled the air, sharp and bitter like what I felt inside. I stayed still, hoping Samuel would defend me. Hoping he'd remind her of the years I'd carried him. The loans, the nights I spent patching his broken roof, the way I sold my old Ford so he could keep his business running. But all I heard was silence. Then, quietly, he said, "You're right." My hand clenched so tight on the handle that the metal bit into my palm. That evening, Samuel called me to the dining table. The same table where we once shared beers after long workdays. He didn't meet my eyes. "Danny," he started, "you know I love you, but things are getting tight. Clara's been uncomfortable. Maybe it's time you find your own place. I almost laughed. My own place? With what money, Sam? You know everything went under after the storm. He looked down, tapping his fingers against the wood. Maybe there's a shelter nearby, or day labor work. You're still strong. I wanted to shout. I wanted to remind him of every sacrifice I made for him, every piece of my pride I had already swallowed. But instead, I said nothing. Because I saw it, the flicker of guilt in his eyes already fading into relief. Throwing me out wasn't breaking his heart. It was freeing his conscience. The next morning, I found my things, my suitcase, my old coat, and my tool bag stacked neatly by the door. Clara stood beside them, arms folded. Don't forget your papers, she said, handing me an envelope. We cleared out your drawer. I didn't look inside. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. As I stepped onto the porch, Samuel came out behind her, avoiding my gaze. You know this isn't personal, he mumbled. You're right, I said quietly. It's not. It's family. He frowned, unsure if it was an insult or forgiveness. I didn't clarify. I just lifted my suitcase, felt its weight, and walked down that gravel path. Each step sounded like the cracking of something inside me that wouldn't mend again. I made it to the end of the street before I turned back. The house looked small now, smaller than I remembered. I could see Clara through the window, drawing the blinds. Samuel's shadow passed once, then disappeared. That's when I realized something that froze my chest colder than any wind. The house, the land, it wasn't even theirs. It was mine. Years ago, when Samuel's credit was shot, I'd co-signed the deed so he could buy it. The documents were in my name too. He must have thought I'd forgotten. But I hadn't. That night, I slept in the back of an abandoned pickup near a gas station off I-35. The air reeked of oil and loneliness. My back ached, my hands cramped from years of work that no one remembered. I stared at the stars peeking through the clouds and whispered to Elena's memory, I kept your promise. I didn't let the world make me bitter, but I might let it make me strong. In the distance, lightning flickered over the Austin skyline, silent but sharp, like a warning, or maybe a sign. They thought they'd buried me in shame, but all they'd done was plant me in soil rich with resolve. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. That night, the rain came down hard, Texas rain, thick and unrelenting, pounding the tin roof of the pickup I now called home. I sat in the driver's seat, shivering under a blanket that smelled of rust and dust. My breath fogged the windshield. Each drop of rain sounded like a clock ticking, reminding me how far I'd fallen. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Samuel's face, the flat look of indifference, the ease with which he'd tossed me aside. We don't take refugees here. His voice kept looping in my mind, louder than the storm. For 66 years, I had built homes for other people. I'd poured concrete in the summer heat, hammered nails until my hands bled. Yet, here I was, a man who built roofs but had none over his own head. The irony was cruel enough to laugh at, but my throat wouldn't let me. My stomach growled. I had half a sandwich from earlier, but I couldn't eat. Hunger wasn't the pain that kept me awake, it was humiliation. The kind that seeps into your bones and turns warmth into ice. I pulled out my old wallet, more tape than leather, and took out a photo of Elena. It was creased and fading, but her eyes still had that same soft strength. I traced her face with my thumb. I tried to be good, I whispered. I helped them. I never asked for more than respect. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the old construction gloves sitting on the dashboard. They were cracked, stiff with age. Those gloves had built every house Samuel ever lived in. I remembered the night I gave him his first set of tools, how proud I was when he started his own company. I didn't know then that my generosity would one day become his weapon against me. A gust of wind rocked the truck, and something inside me shifted with it. Grief gave way to something sharper, cold and steady. I realized I wasn't just angry at Samuel or Clara. I was angry at myself for letting them define my worth. for believing that kindness guaranteed loyalty. I turned on the old radio, hoping for noise, but all I caught was static. Still, beneath that crackle, I thought I heard Elena's voice in my head, "Don't let the world make you bitter." I closed my eyes and spoke into the darkness. "Not bitter," I murmured. "Just awake. Because bitterness breaks a man. But awareness rebuilds him." That's when I made a promise, to myself, to Elena, to the man I used to be. I wouldn't beg, and I wouldn't seek pity. If they wanted to see what a refugee could do, I'd show them. Not through words, but through proof. When the storm eased near dawn, I stepped out of the truck. The air was cool, the streets glistening with puddles that mirrored the gray sky. I looked toward the horizon where the Austin skyline sat like a jagged crown against the clouds. Somewhere out there, opportunity was waiting, buried beneath years of dust and betrayal. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I had one thing left that no one could take: my memory. And buried in that memory was something I hadn't thought about in decades. A piece of land. A signature. A promise I'd once made in good faith to a man who owed me everything. I didn't sleep that morning. I drove straight to the old construction district, where the smell of rain mixed with sawdust and steel. As I watched the sun rise over the city, one thought pulsed in my mind. They thought they'd erased me. But you can't erase a man who remembers where he buried his roots. And with that realization, the first spark of my comeback ignited. The morning after the storm of my humiliation, I drove aimlessly through Austin with the old pickup's wipers squeaking across the windshield. The city looked different, bigger, colder. I passed construction sites that once bore my fingerprints, buildings I had helped raise from nothing. Every nail, every brick was a reminder of what I used to be: a builder, not a beggar. I stopped at a small diner near Riverside, the kind where the smell of burnt coffee and old oil seeps into your clothes. As I sat by the window, nursing a cup I couldn't afford, I noticed a familiar name on a newspaper lying nearby. Austin Ridge Estates sold to new developers in multi-million-dollar deal. I froze. That name, Austin Ridge Estate, dragged me backward 25 years, to a time when my back was strong and my dreams still had room to grow. Back then, I wasn't just another contractor. I was a partner, though few knew it. The project was the brainchild of a young developer named Jacob Merritt, a sharp but reckless visionary who believed Austin would one day rival Los Angeles. He needed hands and experience. I had both. I remember the night we signed the papers in his cluttered trailer office. Rain drummed against the metal roof as he slid the folder toward me. "I can't pay you in cash, Daniel," Jacob said, lighting a cigarette, "but I can give you something better, a piece of the future." Inside the folder was a partnership agreement, a 20% stake in the undeveloped land that would become Austin Ridge. Back then, it was nothing but red clay and mesquite bushes. But to Jacob, it was gold waiting to be dug up. I hesitated. I was a builder, not a gambler. But he looked me dead in the eye. "You trust me, right?" I did. Too much. I signed my name beneath his, the ink smudging slightly from my damp fingers. We sealed it with a handshake, two men bound not by paper, but by faith. The project grew fast. Within 5 years, the first villas were standing, white stone, glass panels, and cedar decks overlooking Lake Travis. Money began to pour in, but somewhere along the line, Jacob vanished. One day, his office was empty, his phone disconnected, his promises gone with him. The lawyers called it a dissolution of partnership. They said my name wasn't listed as a co-founder in the final filings. I was too busy working 12-hour days to chase signatures. My share of the land was swallowed by paperwork and silence. I buried that chapter deep and moved on. Until now. The article said a new developer had purchased the estate through a restructuring of the original holding company, Ridgeview Holdings LLC. I squinted at the print. That name sounded familiar. I pulled out my old wallet, rifled through a stack of faded papers, and found it, a brittle carbon copy of the original contract. My signature. My name. And there, in bold type, the old ownership title, Ridgeview Holdings, 20% Daniel Reyes. For the first time in months, my hands stopped shaking. I left the diner before I even finished the coffee. My pulse thudded in my ears as I drove straight to the county records office. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, looked at the document and frowned. "Sir, this is very old. But if it's legit, you might want to speak with a property lawyer. Ridgeview's holdings were never fully transferred." Her words hit me like a jolt of electricity. Never fully transferred. That meant my claim was still alive. I found a lawyer, a quiet man named Anthony Wells, the kind who spoke little but listened deeply. I handed him the folder with both hands, my voice low. "This land, these signatures, they were mine once. Tell me if they still mean something." He spent 2 days researching. When he called me back, his tone was careful but charged with respect. "Mr. Reyes, I won't sugarcoat it. You've been sitting on a small fortune for decades. The Ridgeview share is still active. You're listed as an original stakeholder. Based on current valuations, your 20% is worth," he paused, "just over $7.6 million. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The number didn't make sense. It didn't feel real. I had slept in my truck the night before, counting change for gas, and now this man was telling me I owned millions. I let out a shaky laugh. "That can't be right." "It's right," he said. "You just didn't know it." I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the papers spread across his desk. My name. My signature. My past, preserved like an ember waiting to burn again. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now?" Anthony smiled faintly. "Now you decide what kind of man you want to be when they find out who you really are." That night, I drove back to the shelter parking lot. I didn't go inside. I just sat there, staring at the skyline. Somewhere beyond those lights, Samuel was probably drinking whiskey in the living room I once paid for, bragging about his success, mocking the brother he'd thrown away. I thought of Clara, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's a refugee." Refugee. The word that had once stung now made me smile. Refugees survive. Refugees rebuild. Refugees rise from nothing. As the city lights shimmered in the distance, I whispered to the night. "You wanted me gone, Sam. But you forgot who taught you how to build. And builders, they always know where the foundation lies." My time in the dark had ended. I wasn't just coming back. I was coming back with everything. I didn't celebrate when I learned the truth. There was no shouting, no dancing, no disbelief. Just silence, thick, heavy silence that tasted like redemption. I spent the next few weeks in a small rented room on the east side of Austin, living like a ghost while Anthony handled the paperwork. I didn't tell a soul. Not the shelter workers who'd helped me, not the men I ate breakfast with every morning, and certainly not Samuel. Some victories are born in secrecy. Each morning, I walked to a nearby cafe, ordered one black coffee, and watched the construction crews rebuild downtown. Hard hats, steel beams, cranes, my old world. It grounded me, reminded me where I came from. It also reminded me of something far more important. Revenge wasn't about anger. It was about balance. When Anthony finalized the legal transfer, he asked how I wanted to proceed with the sale. I told him simply, quietly. We sold my share through a proxy firm, no press, no headlines, just numbers moving across bank screens. In a week, my account held $7.6 million. $7 million earned decades ago, finally coming home to its rightful owner. But my revenge wasn't about money. It was about memory. I needed Samuel and Clara to feel what I'd felt: shame, disbelief, powerlessness. And I wanted it to come not from violence or confrontation, but from truth, delivered like a whisper they couldn't escape. So I began to play the part they'd written for me, the old, defeated man. One morning, I showed up at Samuel's construction office. The receptionist blinked when she saw me, her smile stiff. "Mr. Reyes, are you here to see your brother?" I nodded. "Just for a minute." Samuel's voice carried from behind his glass door, loud and impatient. "I said if we can't get the permits, shut it down. I'm not losing another client." When I knocked, he looked up, surprised, then annoyed. "What do you want, Danny?" I smiled. "I heard you might need an extra hand. Figured I could help out. You know, sweep up, haul materials." Old man still got some strength left. He blinked, then smirked. "You? Working here? You think I have time for charity?" "Not charity," I said softly. "Family." He leaned back in his chair, eyes cold. "If you want a job, fine. We need someone to clean the storage yard. Minimum wage. No complaints." I nodded. "Done." As I walked out, I caught Clara's voice on the phone in the hallway. "Yes, we'll need to refinance. Samuel's running late on 3 payments." "No, don't call him directly. I'll handle it." Their cracks were showing. The house they'd flaunted on social media was bleeding money. Samuel's business was slipping, just like his conscience. For the next few weeks, I worked quietly in the yard, picking up scrap metal, sorting tools, fixing small things no one noticed. Samuel ignored me, except to bark orders. Clara avoided eye contact altogether. They thought they'd reduced me to what I appeared to be, the family burden, finally in his place. But behind the scenes, I was watching. Listening. I learned the company was drowning in debt. Samuel had taken out loans under inflated contracts, counting on a big city development deal that had fallen apart. Worse, the very villa he lived in, the one he had stolen from me by deceit, was listed as collateral. I made my move through the same proxy firm that handled my estate sale. Quietly, I bought the mortgage from the bank. On paper, the lender changed. In reality, the house Samuel called his own now belonged to me. 3 days later, I stopped by their home. Clara opened the door, startled to see me. "What are you doing here?" "Just dropping something off," I said, handing her a letter. Samuel appeared behind her, irritation all over his face. "Is this another guilt trip, Danny? You've got 5 minutes. Won't need that long." I nodded toward the envelope. "That's from the bank. Thought you should see it before the mailman does." He frowned, tore it open, and started reading. His color drained instantly. "What is this? Foreclosure notice? That can't be right." Clara snatched it from his hands, her eyes darting across the page. "Samuel, it says the mortgage was sold. Effective immediately, payments are overdue." "Sold to who?" he demanded. I smiled faintly. "Ridgeview Capital Holdings." Samuel blinked. "Ridgeview? Never heard of them." "Probably not," I said, turning toward the door. "But they've heard of you." As I walked away, I could feel their confusion chasing me like footsteps. A week later, the official notice arrived, signed, stamped, and delivered. Samuel stormed into the yard where I worked, his face red with fury. "You knew about this, didn't you?" he shouted. "You set me up." I looked up from the broom. "Set you up? How could I? I'm just a janitor, remember?" He threw the letter at my feet. "Don't play dumb. Whoever bought that mortgage, they're threatening to take my house." I leaned on the broom handle, meeting his glare. "Then maybe you should have treated the previous owner better." He froze. For a moment, confusion flickered, then realization. You're behind this?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence was sharper than any insult. By the end of that month, Samuel's company collapsed. The bank repossessed his trucks, creditors swarmed like vultures. Clara's friends stopped visiting. Their social media profiles vanished overnight. The perfect life they'd built on arrogance and borrowed money crumbled. When the final eviction notice came, I showed up at their door one last time. Samuel opened it, eyes hollow, clothes wrinkled. Clara stood behind him, arms crossed, pretending she wasn't afraid. "Danny," he said hoarsely. "Please. I didn't mean what I said that day. We were just scared." I interrupted. So was I, Sam. The night I slept in my truck, I was scared too. But I didn't throw you away. He dropped his gaze, shame flooding his face. I handed him another envelope, this one without a seal. Inside's a lease agreement. The villa's under my name now. You can stay for 6 months if you want. After that, you find your own roof. He looked up, disbelief and humiliation mixing like oil and water. You'd let us stay? I nodded. I'm not you. I turned to leave. Behind me, Clara whispered something, voice trembling. How did you do all this? You were nothing. I stopped at the gate, looked back once, and said, that's the thing about builders, Clara. We know how to rebuild from the ground up. You two just forgot where the ground was. That night, I returned to my small apartment and sat by the window. The city lights glowed faintly against the sky. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not the loud kind that comes from revenge, but the quiet kind that comes from justice. They had called me a refugee. They had treated me like an outcast. But I hadn't just survived, I'd reclaimed everything they stole and turned their arrogance into a lesson carved in stone. I wasn't the broken man they'd left behind. I was the builder reborn. And the foundation they tried to bury me under? That was the same ground I used to rise above them all. It happened 2 weeks after I gave Samuel that lease. The city was alive with chatter about a massive real estate conference downtown, the annual Texas Development Summit, where builders, investors, and executives gathered to showcase projects and close million-dollar deals. Ridgeview Holdings, my company now, was one of the event's sponsors. Anthony had insisted I attend. You've spent your life in the shadows, Mr. Reyes, he said. Maybe it's time they saw the man behind the foundations. I wasn't interested in applause. I just wanted closure. Still, I agreed. I went in quietly, dressed in a clean gray suit, my wedding ring polished, my boots shined. For the first time in decades, I walked into a hall not as a worker, but as an owner. Rows of banners stretched across the marble floor, each one displaying the projects I had once built with my own hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. People I used to work for now shook my hand, calling me sir, asking about investment opportunities. But there was one name I didn't expect to see on the attendee list, Samuel Reyes, contractor and consultant, SR Construction. When I spotted him across the room, he looked thinner, older, the shine gone from his eyes. He was standing near a coffee booth, awkwardly pitching himself to a group of developers. Most ignored him. One even waved him off mid-sentence. I could have turned away, but fate had other plans. The event coordinator called for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the keynote session. Today we honor the founding contributors to Austin Ridge Estate, one of the city's most successful developments. The lights dimmed. The projector came alive, displaying photos from the original site, men in hard hats, sun blazing over red Texas soil. Then, a familiar image filled the screen, a younger me, standing beside Jacob Merritt, holding blueprints. The audience murmured. The announcer continued. We pay tribute to those who built the foundation of this city, including Mr. Daniel Reyes, original partner and stakeholder in Ridgeview Holdings. I felt hundreds of eyes turn toward me. Samuel's head snapped up. His expression froze as the announcer went on, reading a short biography that Anthony had submitted on my behalf. Mr. Reyes dedicated 40 years of his life to Texas construction and co-founded several key residential projects. After decades of silence, he returns today as the principal shareholder of Ridgeview Holdings. Applause erupted. It rolled through the hall like thunder, not the hollow sound of flattery, but the kind that carries weight. I stood slowly, nodded once, and took the microphone handed to me. Thank you, I began, voice calm, steady. I'm not much of a speaker. I'm more used to a hammer than a microphone. But I guess life builds its own surprises. The room chuckled lightly. Then I looked toward the back, where Samuel stood frozen. You see, I continued, years ago, I helped lay the first stone of Austin Ridge. Back then, I didn't have much, just faith, and 2 strong hands. I believed hard work and loyalty were enough. But life taught me a cruel truth: some people build walls where there should have been doors. The hall went silent. For years, I worked quietly, thinking family meant protection. Until one day, the people I trusted most turned me away. Called me a refugee. A burden. They took what wasn't theirs and forgot who helped them stand. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw Samuel's knuckles whiten around the back of a chair. But I learned something in that silence, I said, voice tightening. A builder never loses his foundation even if the house falls apart. Because the foundation is who he is. And if he's patient enough, he can rebuild. Stronger. Higher. Alone if he must. Applause broke again, slower this time, but deeper. I set the mic down, turned, and began to walk off stage. That's when I heard it, a choked voice from behind. Danny! The crowd turned. Samuel stumbled forward, face pale. Danny, please, can we talk? The murmurs grew. Cameras flashed. I stopped near the steps, looked back. Now you want to talk? He took another step, desperation cracking through his pride. I didn't know. I didn't know you were. What? Worth something? I cut in, my voice calm but sharp. You didn't need to know that, Samuel. You just needed to remember I was your brother. He flinched, words dying in his throat. The hall was so still that even the air seemed to hold its breath. You threw me out when I had nothing, I said. And the roof you stand under now, it's mine again. But don't worry. I paused, lowering my voice. I won't throw you out. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth. I turned to the audience. Because truth, like a builder's level, doesn't bend for anyone. It always finds balance. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters swarmed forward. Samuel stood rooted, shoulders sagging, eyes wet. As I left the stage, Anthony leaned close and whispered, "You ended him without a single insult." No, I said quietly. I ended the lie. The next morning, the news spread across Austin. Refugee brother revealed as millionaire founder Reyes family fallout at development summit. My phone didn't stop ringing. Old co-workers, reporters, even city officials wanted interviews. I turned them all down. I had no interest in fame, only peace. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I drove to the villa one last time. Samuel's truck was gone. The porch lights were off. I stepped inside alone. The air was stale, the walls bare, they'd taken everything they could. On the dining table sat a small note in Samuel's handwriting. I'm sorry, Danny. I don't expect forgiveness, but I understand now what I took from you. Not the house, your dignity. I folded the note, slipped it into my pocket, and looked around the empty space. It wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was something cleaner. Relief. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, sat down, and listened to the quiet. This was the same table where I'd once been humiliated. Now it was mine again, but it didn't feel like victory, just closure. As the evening breeze drifted through the open window, I whispered, "We're even now, Sam." Then I stood, turned off the lights, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the Texas sky was clear for the first time in months. The stars shimmered like nails hammered into the heavens. Reminders that every ending, no matter how dark, still leaves light behind. I wasn't a refugee anymore. I was a builder who had reclaimed his name, his home, and his peace. After the conference, my name began to travel through Austin like an echo returning to a canyon. Daniel Reyes, they said, the man who came back from nothing. Some called me lucky. Others called me ruthless. But I wasn't either. I was just done being silent. I moved out of the city that week, away from the noise, away from the headlines. I bought a modest ranch house 20 miles outside Austin, nothing extravagant, just 4 acres of land, a small porch, and a wide view of the open sky. That was all I ever wanted. The first night there, I sat on the steps and watched the sunset bleed across the horizon. The air smelled of mesquite and dust, like the world was brand new again. For the first time in years, I slept without anger in my chest. The next morning, I drove to Ridgeview Holdings. Anthony had prepared the documents to finalize my ownership. I signed them quietly, then slid another folder across his desk. "What's this?" he asked. "A transfer," I said. "Half of my profits from the Austin Ridge sale, I want them donated." He looked up, surprised. "To who?" "The shelter on Riverside. The one that gave me a bed when no one else would." He nodded slowly, then smiled. "You're closing the circle, Mr. Reyes." "No," I said. "I'm building a new one." Word of the donation spread fast. Reporters tried to make a story of it. Refugee turned millionaire gives back to the homeless, but I refused every interview. This wasn't about polishing my image. It was about honoring the people who had seen my humanity when my own family didn't. Weeks passed quietly. I filled my days fixing the fences, tending the small garden behind the house, and helping local workers find day jobs. Some of them reminded me of myself years ago, hard men with soft eyes, trying to stay alive in a world that no longer respected calloused hands. One afternoon, as I was loading lumber onto my truck, a familiar sound reached my ears, the crunch of tires on gravel. I turned. A rusted sedan stopped by the gate. Samuel stepped out. He looked smaller than before, as though life had been chiseling pieces off him bit by bit. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair gray at the edges. Clara wasn't with him. He hesitated by the gate before finally speaking. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I wasn't sure I would," I said plainly. He nodded, accepting it. The wind carried silence between us for a while. Then he said, "I sold the truck. Paid off some debts. Clara left a few weeks ago." I said nothing. "I came to thank you," he continued. "You could have ruined me completely. You didn't." "That wasn't mercy, Sam," I said. "It was a lesson. Mercy means forgiveness. I haven't decided if I'm ready for that yet." He lowered his head. "I understand." He started to turn away, but I stopped him. "Sam," I called out. "When I was in that shelter, I used to think about why you did it, why you threw me out. And I realized something. You weren't cruel. You were afraid. Afraid that my presence reminded you of who you used to be before money, before pride." He looked up, eyes glassy. "You're right," he whispered. "And I hate that you're right." I sighed, set down the lumber, and walked to the gate. "We can't change the past, brother," I said. "But we can build something from what's left." He blinked, unsure what I meant. I nodded toward the field behind me. "There's a guest shed out back. Empty but dry. You can stay a while if you need to. Just until you find your footing." Samuel stared at me as though I'd offered him the moon. "After everything I did?" "Because of everything you did," I replied. "You taught me that hate builds nothing. So I'll build peace instead." He swallowed hard, nodded, and quietly stepped through the gate. Over the next few days, Samuel helped me repair the fences and repaint the barn. He worked quietly, humbly. We didn't talk much, but every nail driven into the wood felt like a word we didn't need to say. One evening, we sat by the porch watching the sky turn violet. He broke the silence. "Do you ever miss her, Elena?" "Every day," I said. "But I think she'd be proud. Not of what I gained, but of what I didn't lose." He nodded slowly. "I used to envy you," he admitted. "The way people respected you. I wanted that so badly I forgot what respect really meant." I turned to him. "Respect is earned, Sam. You can still earn it. Just start with honesty." He gave a small, broken smile. "I'll try." That night, I watched from the window as he sat alone under the pecan tree, head bowed. For the first time since the day he'd slammed the gate on me, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a man trying to rebuild his own soul. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again. Samuel eventually moved out, found a small rental near town, and started repairing old homes for a living. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Every now and then, he'd stop by with fresh bread or coffee, and we'd share a quiet breakfast on the porch. The house was peaceful again, filled not with the echoes of betrayal but the calm of forgiveness slowly taking root. And one morning, as the Texas sun climbed above the hills, I stood in my yard, feeling the wind on my face, and whispered, "Elena, I did it. I didn't let the world make me bitter." The ranch stood strong, the fences steady, the soil rich with new growth. Somewhere out there, people still whispered about the refugee who sold the Austin villa for millions. But to me, that story was already finished. What mattered now wasn't what I'd lost or gained, it was what I'd learned, that dignity is the one thing no storm, no betrayal, and no brother can ever take from a man who knows his worth. It's been a year since everything came full circle. The city has moved on, as cities always do. Building new towers, forgetting old names. But out here, 20 miles from Austin's noise, time moves slower. The mornings still smell of cedar and rain, and the evenings hum with the song of crickets that no one bothers to interrupt. Some nights, I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and listen to the wind push through the fields. That's when I think about the man I used to be, the one who stood at his brother's gate, suitcase in hand, trembling from humiliation. That man is gone. What remains is what the fire left behind, steel. I've rebuilt my life, not with anger, but with intention. Ridgeview Holdings continues to grow under Anthony's careful management, though I've taken no active role. My days of chasing contracts are over. I've chosen to invest quietly in people instead, local workers, single mothers, small-town projects no one else believes in. Last month, I helped fund a new wing at the Riverside shelter. They wanted to name it after me, but I refused. Name it after those who never gave up, I told them. Because they're the reason I found my way back. The sign outside now reads, "The Builder's Haven." Every time I see it, I think of all the men and women who walk through its doors, carrying the same weight I once carried: shame, loss, and the desperate hope for a second chance. Samuel still visits. He comes every Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee and that same awkward half-smile. We don't talk much about the past anymore. Some things are better left as blueprints, visible enough to learn from, but never rebuilt. A few weeks ago, he asked me, "Do you ever regret forgiving me?" I thought about it before answering. "No," I said. "Regret belongs to the ones who hold on. I'm just trying to live free." He nodded quietly, staring at the fields. "You always were the stronger one," he murmured. "No," I replied. "I was just the one who kept working." We sat in silence after that, watching the sun rise over the hills. The light spilled across the land I now owned, the same land that once symbolized betrayal. Funny how time changes the meaning of things. What once felt like an ending had simply been the clearing of old ground for something new to grow. The other day, I found an old envelope in a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside was Elena's last note, the one she'd left tucked between the pages of her Bible before she passed. Her handwriting trembled, but her words were steady. "If they ever break you, remember, what's built with love doesn't crumble. It endures, Daniel. It endures." I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before folding it carefully and placing it back where I found it. Her voice was still there in every word. She had always known the truth long before I did, that strength isn't about standing tall when things are easy. It's about rebuilding yourself when no one believes you can. That's what I did. That's what every man who's been cast aside must learn to do. When I walk the property now, I see the same patterns I once saw on construction sites: lines of growth, symmetry, balance. Even in nature, there's structure. Even pain has purpose. Sometimes, young builders come by to ask for advice. They expect business talk: contracts, permits, investment. But I tell them something simpler. Don't just build walls. Build foundations strong enough to carry the weight of who you are. Because when the storms come, and they will, it's your character that keeps you standing, not your fortune. They usually nod politely, not fully understanding. They will one day. Last night, a storm rolled in from the west. The rain came down in sheets, drumming against the roof of the ranch house. I stepped outside, letting it soak me to the bone. The smell of wet soil filled the air. For a moment, it felt like the night everything started, the night I sat alone in that pickup truck, broke, forgotten, and angry. But this time, the rain didn't sting. It felt like cleansing, like the world washing away the last traces of bitterness. I looked up at the sky, eyes half closed, and whispered to the storm. You can't drown a man who's already learned how to rebuild. Then I laughed softly, because I finally understood what all of this had meant. Every loss, every betrayal, every slammed door, it wasn't punishment. It was preparation. They called me a refugee once. But the truth is, I was never running from anything. I was being guided back to the place where I truly belonged, not in someone else's house, not in their acceptance, but in my own peace. Now, when I wake each morning, I thank the silence. I thank the wind that moves through the fields. And I thank the storm that tore everything apart, because without it, I would never have learned what it means to build again. If you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted, if you've ever stood alone and thought it was the end, remember this. What's taken from you can be replaced. What's broken can be rebuilt. But your dignity, the truth of who you are, that's yours forever. Sometimes, life tears down your walls just to show you the strength of your foundation. If stories like this one speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because there are more truths buried in silence, stories of betrayal, redemption, and justice that deserve to be told. Thank you for listening. And remember, they said I was a refugee. But I was always a builder. To anyone still fighting their storm, don't quit. The foundation you're standing on might be cracked, but it's still yours. Rebuild on it. If this story reached you, if you've ever felt forgotten or cast aside, remember Daniel Reyes. Remember that strength doesn't roar, sometimes it just keeps building quietly. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story of truth, justice, and redemption. Your support keeps these voices alive. The ones that prove it's never too late to stand back up and rebuild.